It's late in the day on a Saturday. I'm shocked at. Anyway, we thinned out substantially, so it's just us. We can talk informally here. That's okay. All right. For the people that are left here, I need to talk about this term MVP, short for minimum viable product. This is a very non-technical talk. I'll see if I can start to make it a little bit technical because it should be more technical than it is. See if I can explain why I said that. How many people worked for a company that used this term MVP for the people that are here? Okay, that's most. Cool. On a scale of 1 to 5, how useful is this term? Where 5 is super useful, glad we've got it, solves a lot of problems. 3 is it's okay, and 1 is this term sucks, it causes more pain than we used to have before. On a scale of 1 to 5, how useful is MVP? Good. So I'm looking around. You should look around too. Your mileage may vary because I do see 5s and I see 2s and some 1s. So somewhere between horribly useful and terribly useless. And that's where this sits. Now, I'm curious before we start here. If I say the term MVP, what does MVP mean in your company? Give me a couple definitions of MVP. Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. Yeah, that's, I don't know if that's the definition. When you look up a word for its definition, it doesn't just list the word. How would you define a minimum viable product? Yeah, please, just yell. Say again? It's a finished product. I saw another hand back there. What else? It's an excuse to skip things. It's an experiment. It's a thin slice. It's a working prototype. It's iterative. That's a way you do that. It sort of means you do more. Any other definitions?
Mexican vicious pancake.
Say that again.
Mexican vicious pancake.
Mexican vicious pancake.
Did you really say Mexican?
Mexican vicious pancake.
That's not really a definition. You're just making that up.
Well, you asked one, you asked for more stuff. So.
Okay, good. All right. And on that note, it's probably time to end. All right. Look, let me see if I can back up. I want to explain what this term is, and I want to explain where it came from. And my goal here is to explain why it is so freaking confusing and why there are so many different definitions. And the sad thing is they are all right, including Mexican vicious pancake. Look, I'm old. In 1985, I didn't write software for a living. I sold software for a living when I was in my 20s, or actually started as a teenager. I worked in a software store selling software for a living. Now, that's not me, but I look a lot like that. What's remarkable is it does look amazing like I used to look. I used to have a lot more hair. And there was a quirk about the way we sold software back in the 1980s. We sold it in boxes. That's an example of a box. And in fact, that is specifically one of the educational programs we sold to kids, and we sold a lot of them. If you look really close, that's not a flat image. That's a photograph of a box, and it's rough. So this is one of the boxes we sold. Now, this term MVP came from, well, the 1980s and 1990s. It's a rather old term. So I need to start by explaining how the software business works. Because if you're just writing code, you might not have thought so much about how the business works. And maybe this might be obvious. But it starts with ideas. And if you were going to make a software product, it may start with an idea for a product. If you've already got a software product, it may start with an idea for a feature or an enhancement. And what we've got to do is turn that idea into a box, into something we can ship. Now, the scary thing, the tough thing is how many features or enhancements or what are all the things that go into that product? And we've got to make a lot of decisions about that. We call that stuff scope. And if we work for a company that's going to sell this thing, we worry about how long it's going to take to turn this scope into this product. So the cost starts to get important. Cost in software is often a function of how many people it's going to take to produce this stuff. And because we want to start, well, for paying these people, and we want to start making money, the time matters a lot. So we worry about this cost, time, and scope thing. Now, here's the hard part is after you ship this stuff, what really matters is what happens after things come out. What happens is, well, we have these customer people. And what we hope is true is that they see the product, or they try, or they buy the product. We hope that they use the product. We hope that they keep using the product. And we hope that they say good things about the product. Because if they see it and they try it and they don't buy it, or they see it and they buy it and they return it, or if they see it and they try it and they use it and then they stop using it and write bad reviews, that's not good. But if they do all this stuff, that's cool. And if one person does it, that's super cool. But look, one isn't going to pay your paycheck. One isn't going to give you the thing that matters the very most to your organization. And that's this ROI thing. It's money that we need, and it's money that you're paid. What companies need isn't what users need. Companies need money. They need brand awareness. They need market share. Those are the things that matter to your organization. Now, if we think back to the 1980s and 1990s, this was tough because we made these boxes. And we had to make decisions about what went in the box. We couldn't predict if people were going to be happy with this stuff, so we had to try and put everything in it they asked for. But if we put everything they asked for, that was going to take a lot of time. If we didn't put enough, then we ran into the problem where they would see it and try it and hate it. And, well, we had to print all these boxes. There was just a lot of hand-wringing about getting it right. This is a big challenge. Now, I draw this, for anybody who's seen me give a talk before, you've seen me draw this model a million times, because one of the things we get messed up with in software all the time is telling the difference between this and this. And we use goals like goals and objective, and we use words like goals and objective, but I want to separate, different kinds of objectives or goals. I want to call this stuff output, and that's not the same as this stuff. Well, I'm going to call everything that happens when things come out, that's called outcome because of that. And outcome isn't measured in time, cost, and scope. It's not measured with velocity. It's not measured in story points. Outcome is measured by measuring people's behavior. And what's interesting is people's behavior isn't the money's important, and I can guarantee your company measures how much money it makes, but that's a consequence of people doing this. I'm going to use a different word for this long-term stuff. I'm going to use the word impact for that stuff, and it's this impact that's measured in ROI and brand and market share. So look, one of the things we learned early on is making good decisions about what to build so that we maximize this outcome and we get an impact for it is hard. And if we did too much, that would hurt our ROI because it increases the I and makes us late to market. If we do too little, it's hurt. And we worked on a lot of different ways to do this, to make good decisions. Now, it was in the 1990s that this guy, Frank Robinson, who was one of the people doing this, and he actually worked on this product. I chose that particular box because, ironically, that was a box I did sell a lot of when I was in the 20s, and ironically, it is one of the companies he worked with and one of the boxes that he built. And throughout the 1990s, he was teaching product companies to do this stuff and worked with a lot of product companies. And he described long, nasty processes of building prototypes, taking them out to people, working with lots of people, and he described a way of figuring this out. Now, he eventually started working hard as a consultant, and it's Frank that coined this term, MVP. And what he described, or what he originally defined MVP, or minimum viable product, as well, it was the smallest product or release of a product. Let's put a T on there. That can meet its desired market outcomes. Now, this is a pretty straightforward definition. When he said product, what he meant by that was product or product release. And when he said viable, well, what he meant by that was meet its desired market outcomes. Or, well, what he meant is that it was successful. And what Frank did was describe a way of working with customers and users and testing or experimenting. And that's what he described. Now, look, let me tell you, a lot of people think, a lot of people will give this guy credit for really popularizing the term MVP. And this guy's name is Eric Ries. And what's interesting about Eric is he never built a product that went into a box. Now, let me talk. This first definition comes from Robinson, and it was 2001 that he first published this thing. So if I fast forward, it's 10 years that in 2011, Eric Ries, he published a book called The Lean Startup. Anybody heard of that book, The Lean Startup, before? Okay, good. I want to double check. You're laughing, like, of course we have. So Eric, the interesting thing about Eric is he's a super sharp guy. He's simplified a lot of concepts. But one of the things that Eric sucks at is naming things. Eric was the founder of a struggling or failing startup. And, well, his startup was, one of the things they didn't do right was this. In fact, in his failing startup, I forgot to put Eric's picture up here. This was the product that Eric released. It's called IMVU. Anybody heard of that product, IMVU? So just 2 people here. Anybody a fan of that product? Anybody use that product? Good. You should look around at how many people are using that product. Eric isn't awesome at this product stuff. That isn't an awesome product. But what was interesting is it was an online product. They could release it online, and they could screw it up, and then they could change it. And one of the things that Eric thought, like a lot of people, was that the way you come up with this MVP thing is you guess. Dave, you talked about guessing a lot this morning, and we do guess a lot. But on Eric's board of directors was this guy, Steve Blank. Steve said, well, he's worked with startups for a long time. He's worked with technology companies for a long time. And Steve had written a book a while back called 4 Steps to Epiphany. Has anybody heard of that book before? Oh, man, more than I thought. Has anybody read that book? Has anybody tried to read it and stopped reading it after about the first chapter or so? Could at least one. That book is, his next book is much better, but that book is, it's tough. It's a tough read, isn't so good. But one of the main concepts that Steve Blank described was this concept called validated learning. It's this stuff we do, and it's the stuff that Robinson was doing, the stuff we were all doing in the 80s and 90s in order to figure out if our product was viable. So let me explain what validated learning is. And actually, after watching Dave Farley talk this morning, this is the stuff that he was describing this morning. Now, I'll pick on Dave for a minute, because he said that guessing is bad. Say that again? Not quite? Okay, got it. All right, well, good. You didn't, because, look, if I have that Feynman video. Feynman says guessing is awesome. So all of this starts with a good guess. But there is a sexy new word for guess that we like, that's better, and that's that word, this word hypothesis, because that makes it a much more official guess. Now, if I've got this hypothesis about a product that I believe will work, the first backlog we build is not a backlog of features or enhancements or things that we could build. It is a backlog of crap that may go wrong. It's a backlog filled with risks, a backlog filled with assumptions that I'm making that might not pan out, and often just questions about, there's holes here. I'm not sure what we should do here. And if I understand all these questions, risks, and assumptions, well, the one at the top of this backlog is the one that scares the crap out of me, the one that keeps me up at night. And if I can isolate that one, if I can figure out what that one is, then I can say, okay, if this is the thing that scares me most, and if I've got questions about that, then I can ask, what is the smallest thing that I could do or think of doing to flush this out, to answer this question, to debunk this risk, to make that assumption not an assumption. And then I am going to get to work and, create a test. And sometimes that test is built out of code. Sometimes that test is built out of paper. Sometimes that test involves just talking to humans and asking them what they think is best. Sometimes, if you were listening to GOTO, sometimes that test is actually using your own head and your own judgment about whether something looks good or doesn't look good. But we do something, and we may put something in front of somebody on a computer, or we may observe something, but what we get back from that isn't shippable software. What we get back from that is data or information. And we use that information to change our hypothesis. And if we change our hypothesis, that changes what we believe was true. Now, I mentioned, this is the way validated learning works. And I've simplified it a bit here. I probably didn't describe it the way Steve did. But what we owe Eric a debt of gratitude for is simplifying and popularizing things. Now, Eric referred to this as a build, measure, and learn cycle. But remember, I said Eric sort of sucks at naming things. Build sounds like you're supposed to build software, but in fact, there's this important part of figuring out risks and biggest risks and how to test it. And when we create a test, what we build may not be software. And then when we measure, that sounds like we're going to get back metrics or data, but we may be getting back subjective data. We may be getting back opinions. We may be getting back, it may not be numbers or even lots of numbers. So build may not mean build, measure may not mean measure the way you think it does, but learn actually means learn. So that part's right. And what we want to do with this process is not do it in a 1 week or 2 week sprint. We want to do this stuff as quick as possible. And in fact, when we're doing this stuff well, we can do this stuff in hours or days at the longest, but we definitely don't want to spend weeks doing this stuff. And in fact, the goal of this is to decrease the cycle time of doing this, do this as quick as we possibly can. And that idea of decreasing the cycle time of something, that's a core principle of lean thinking. And Eric had been doing Agile processes. Agile processes work relatively slow. You build stuff in 1 or 2 week sprints, and that's way too slow to learn. We don't have to wait that long to learn. So he dusted off this lean concept, but if you've done any looking at lean processes, there's a lot more to lean than decreasing cycle time. So lean startup is not very lean, it's just a little bit lean. And when we talk about validated learning, it's not a startup thing, it's just a thing. It does not matter how many people work for your company. You can be a startup with 2, or you can be a huge company with tens of thousands of people. You still need validated learning. So lean startup is not very lean, and it is not for startups. So don't get hosed by that. Now, even worse, Eric Ries said, we don't need this MVP concept anymore, or, it's wrong. The problem is this is just a guess. Well, it was never a guess. Robinson never thought it was a guess. And what he pointed out is it is important for us to get to a successful product. But Eric redefined this term in the lean startup, and he redefined it to be, that thing that we did in that build, measure, learn cycle, he redefined it to be the smallest thing we could do or make to test a hypothesis. I'm going to put this as a product hypothesis. You can't possibly read my writing. Now, this sounds great because we need this, but what's super annoying is, gosh, I remember when I learned to code, we kept relying on this one principle we looked at for naming things was the idea that our code should be intention revealing, or it was important how you name things. The name should mean what they are. But what's annoying with this is when Eric says product, he no longer means product. He means test. And when Eric says viable, he no longer means successful or viable in the market. He means you learned something. Now, this is a big problem. These two definitions aren't subtly different. They are polar opposites of each other. And when you use this definition, you might mean test. You might think of it as iteratively, but the people you're talking to might actually think you mean viable product because that's what you said. So I'm going to, with people I work with and companies I work with, I tell them just stop using this term. It isn't helping you. Your business people think you actually mean viable product, and you might think you mean test. So look, what's important is that we arrive at small, successful releases. So look, let's talk about a small, successful release where success actually means we meets its desired outcomes. And well, for your company to sustain itself, it kind of needs money. And let's talk about this as a next best test, because like someone said at the beginning, these are iterative, and we have lots of these things. Now, let me add one third annoying anti-definition here. How many people here are using Agile processes? Or so that's almost everybody. Or Agile is the next waterfall, and it's the next thing, as Dave Thomas said earlier on. It's the next thing we're going to try and figure out how to do wrong. And this is one of them. But Agile is built on this foundation of, well, one of these founding principles is that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, there's a lot going on here, and all of it's pretty stupid, because I don't sit around on Amazon and saying, gosh, Amazon would make me so much happier if they would just ship software faster. That's not why I like Amazon. So when we talk about the customer here, we're talking about our business or the organization we work with. But there is this emphasis on shipping software. And again, I, as a user of a product, I don't use products. The most popular products aren't the products that have more code. They aren't the products that have more features. The most successful software companies aren't the ones that ship the most products or the products with most features. That has nothing actually to do with viability. So this is a problem. And then to make it even worse, we get phrases like definition of done, where everything we build has to be, well, we talk about definitions of done and potentially shippable software, and we get bound up around needing to ship stuff that goes out to all of our customers with everything we build, which definitely makes it impossible to count a prototype or an experiment as potentially shippable, because we would never ship an experiment to our customers. That would be crazy. So when we add this Agile definition, we get this third weird definition for MVP, which is, well, this crappy first release, or this as much as we could ship in time, because the goal is just effing ship something. It doesn't have to be good, and it just has to be potentially shippable. Now, anywhere in here, any of these things can be an MVP, and this is where we're at. I want to start to look. This is why we get a bit confused. I want to start to layer on some concepts under this. What I'd like to do is ask you to never again ship crappy first releases. Never strive to ship as much as you can in an iteration, and be really deliberate about arriving at small, successful releases, and be really deliberate about testing things. So both of these definitions are critically important, and I guess if it works to call both of them the same thing, MVP, you can, but it's just going to confuse everybody you talk to. Let's talk about what this MVP thing is, and I need to start with a reality check here. The reason we do any of this stuff at all is because most ideas suck or they won't work out. Now, I drew this model here, and that starts to be the problem with this model. It starts with this idea thing, and the problem with ideas is if you ask any of your customers or users, they will have ideas. If you ask any stakeholders or people in your organization about what we should be building, they will have ideas. So problem number one with ideas is there is always too many. Now, has anybody here, this is my first time in Singapore. I don't know much about the city or what's going on here. Are there startup accelerators in Singapore? Yes, what is it? What is the name of a startup accelerator in Singapore? Somebody?
A-Star.
Say again?
A-Star.
A-Star? Is that my? Look, has anybody visited that or a startup accelerator before? So look, for people that have, these are co-working spaces where lots of startups work under one roof. They usually receive some guidance and a little bit of funding. And if you, well, what's the failure rate of startups? Does anybody know? If you started a startup today, what are the odds that you're going to have a successful company? What are the odds you're going to have a successful company? 1 in 10. Well, what is the failure rate of startups? If 1 in 10, we got 90%.
What does success mean?
Yeah, what is success?
Unicorn, does it mean become kind of sustainable?
Yeah, well, sustainable. Let's say that. Because you are the founder of a company that's sustainable for you because it supports a couple people and does fairly well. So look. We know that the failure rate for startups, the study I often cite, and I should get it onto a slide, saw a study reported where they had around 130 companies that had all received venture capital funding. The study ran for 2 years, and by the end of the 2-year study, 80% were out of business. And it isn't true that even the remaining 20% were successful. They were just simply not out of business. So the odds of your startup being around after 2 years is pretty low. So look, when you walk into one of these startup accelerators, given that, they should be super depressing places. So look, I said there's always too many, and when we talk about these startups, when we talk about new product startups, most of these ideas do in fact suck or won't work out. Another characteristic is once we get a product that does work out, we start believing that every feature or enhancement we add to that product from now on is going to be awesome. But there are also studies that cite that most features, or 60 to 70% of features we put in products, fit into the rarely or never used category. Now, I keep trying to go back to this. If you go back to these startup accelerators and you walk around there, they aren't depressing places. Usually people are pretty positive. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they think that most startups are successful. If you talk to any one of them, they will tell you that, yes, most startups fail. And they will look at all the other companies and product founders around them and say, yes, most of these ideas suck, but not ours. We all self-evaluate our own ideas with a huge amount of bias. And it's easy for us to imagine perfect outcomes. It's easy for us to fool ourselves. And this is why we do this stuff. This is why we test. Guesses are horribly awesome, but what's not awesome about guesses is when we don't use a scientific method, as Dave said. If we don't validate we're doing the right thing, that's where the problem comes in. Now, when we have an idea that may or may not be awesome, we have a lot of choices to make. If we're going to test that idea, we've got choices that range from fast and cheap, that range all the way from expensive and time-consuming. Now, I think we need to agree that if you've got an idea for a piece of software, the most expensive, time-consuming thing you can do is to just build it. is to build especially scalable, shippable software. Now, look, if there's a lot of things I could do if I start looking at what my questions and my problems are. If I start asking, do I really understand the problem that I'm solving? Do people really want it? Can I really resolve the technical issues? Well, is it feasible to build? And ultimately, I said, look, people it has to solve a problem. They have to want it. They have to try it. And, the other question is, will people keep using it? I want to talk about cheaper things we can do other than building scalable software. So let's start from the beginning here. Actually, I want to start and show how we start exposing hypotheses in companies. I'm going to use as an example a US company that I work with. This is a US car company called CarMax. You wouldn't have heard of them here. If you've ever lived in the States, you probably would have. The data in this slide's a little bit old. There are about 180 locations. They are officially this planet's largest used car dealership. They're a Fortune 100 company. When I put the data in this slide, I think I've got 14 billion US dollars in sales. They're closer to 16 billion in sales last year. These guys sell a lot of cars. They're very good at this testing and experimenting thing. I've got a picture of these people, and I often show this picture because there's a lot of crap going on the wall, and one of the things behind the guy on the left are a bunch of numbers from experiments they currently have running, things that are in production that have data. This is CarMax's finance group, and the finance group is running experiments on new ways to do financing. Now, every time I show this picture, everybody asks me, why do these people have such crappy expressions on their faces? Why are they so upset? Now, I usually point out that there's a product manager there, a user experience person. The lady next to me and the other people next to me are the engineers, but I took the picture and I was kind of standing up front. And the people there are executives. That guy on the right is the CIO, and if you were to look up that company, CarMax, and Forbes magazine, you'll find interviews of him and them talking about what they're doing from a product perspective. They're really good at going on the record with this stuff. What's important is also written on the wall behind them are these things called hypothesis statements. Does anybody used an Agile user story or a story before that says, as a user, I want so that? Has anybody written one of those things before? Those are awesome. Or kind of, I guess. That's another story. But they just say what people want and maybe why. But these are different. They say a little bit more. This is CarMax's finance team, and they start with this phrasing that says, this is what we believe is true. We believe that there are customers like this. This person is Maureen, and that's one of the artifacts on the wall there is a fuzzy persona. Maureen describes a kind of person who buys a car and needs financing, or instead of just buying the car outright, she considers a car payment a monthly thing, like rent or utilities. And she doesn't look at the price of the car, she looks at her payment, and she decides whether she can afford the car based upon whether that payment fits in her budget. The problem is when she's looking at cars on the lot, they don't have payment amounts in the window, they have prices. And the payment is a function not of it's the price of the car, but it's what current lending rates are, what her credit rating is, what the lender will give on that car, and since these are used cars, based upon the age and the mileage. And the problem is the lender won't give a number until you sit down and do finance paperwork, and that's what happens. The people like Maureen sit down and do the paperwork, and then they see what the payment is, and if the payment is too high, which it often is, she says, dang, and then has to go back out to the lot and do this again. This takes a long time, this sucks for her, and it sucks for CarMax, because they're spending their time to do this also. Sort of sucks for everybody. So they believe that they provide people like this decisions on all vehicles, and a decision is a lender-approved loan. It's the product of doing all that paperwork. Well, right now, today, doing all that paperwork takes a lot of time. We send a lot of data to the bank gives back a decision, but what they're talking about doing, and CarMax sells enough cars, is building an API, forcing banks to work differently, and forcing banks to provide an approval on hundreds of cars. In fact, any car that she pulls up on a website, they're going to provide a decision for. Now, they can force banks to change the way they work in the same way that Apple years ago could force mobile phone providers to change the way they do voicemail and things like that. So it's a fairly big hypothesis, but if they do that, but they believe that she's going to feel more empowered, she's going to save time, and ultimately this is going to result in a higher conversion rate for CarMax. That's the way this is. But the important thing is, what they're exposing at a business level is what we believe what they believe will happen. And it isn't the output, the thing that they want to build. What they're exposing is the outcome and ultimately the business impact. And, well, what they're able to start asking is, do we believe this is true? And phrasing it this way allows them to start saying, okay, do I buy that? Because we're about to spend an awful lot of money building it. In fact, look, if we were to build this, in the case of this particular thing, this is going to take them many months and millions of dollars to do this, and they have to force banks to change the way they work. So that's sort of scary. They are going to go about testing this thing. And that's what we've got to talk about. Now, let's fast forward a little bit and let's talk about testing things. Look, if we start with, do we really understand the problem we're solving? Well, the best way to be sure that you understand people and their problems isn't to necessarily, well, it isn't to build software. I'll show you examples of what that looks like. These people are with a US company called Kodak, and yeah, they're still in business. Kodak, well, one of the products they have that's successful is this kiosk that goes in grocery stores and pharmacies. You can bring in a USB stick or a camera and plug it in and print out a high-resolution picture. Now, these guys, this team has been watching people use that thing. The tall guy on the right is a product manager. The guy standing next to him is a UX person. The guy standing next to the tall guy on the right is an engineer. The short white-haired person is not on their team. She's been trying to get a picture out for the last hour. Now, these people, once a week, go out and actually watch people using their product. They've used more formal mechanisms in the past where they recruit people and have them come into usability labs or do other things, but the problem is these short, white-haired ladies do not respond back to ads to do usability testing. If they really want to talk to people using their product, they kind of have to go where they are. Now, at the end of the day, I was there and took the picture. This is one of the earlier times they started doing this. This guy came back at the end of the day and said, this has been the worst day of my life. He said, I had no idea how much damage we've been inflicting on people. I promise if you talk to the people using your product, you won't prioritize your backlog the same way again. Whatever you thought your problems were, you'll think differently. This guy on the right is responsible for a line of portable printers. The guy on the left is from China. He's an engineer. He designs portable printers. The guy in the middle will take pictures of you and your family at the Gateway Monument in India, in Mumbai, for 30 rupees. That's his portable printer in front of them. This is somebody who uses a portable printer as a primary tool of the way that they do business. It's worth a lot of money to them. The printer does not look very portable to me. But it's spending a day out there working with these people that helps them really understand what problems they're solving. And that matters a lot for the guy on the left, who has to design this thing. It matters a lot to him. Look, this guy is a marketing guy at a bank. And we're watching him work, and we're doing a common thing that we do when we watch people work, and that's something called an apprenticeship interview. It's not a sit down and tell me how you use this product, or sit down and show me how you use this product. We start by saying, look, pretend we just started working here, and I need you to teach me to do your job. And when they teach you to do their job, they will teach you all their workarounds and all their hacks and all their tips and tricks, and they'll expose all the pain they're going through to do this. Super useful way to learn. you worked at Barclays a lot. You use Barclays examples. I worked with Barclays a little bit, and I avoid putting their name on here, but they know I've got the picture. This guy is a stock portfolio manager at Barclays. Now, when I was working with them, we showed up and we're building systems, a portfolio management system for them. And we've got this giant backlog and we're trying to build stuff fast, but it's just not making much sense. And we asked them, look, they said, look, it's really important to us that we meet the portfolio managers, that we learn how they work. And they said, no, these are super busy people. These are the people that earn all the money that pays for this building and pays for all of us. You can't take up their time. And we said, well, we are building a system for them. It's sort of important we understand how they work. And they said, okay, we'll make some time. We'll try and set up some appointments for you to talk to them. And then we said, well, we want to go down and kind of take a quick look at their workspace so that we can see how they work. Nobody on this team knows how these guys work. And they said, well, you definitely can't go down there because you'd be in their way. And I said, well, we don't want to talk to them. We won't get in their way. We just want to look at the way that they're working and take a few pictures. They said, well, you can't take pictures. Legal would be all over if you took pictures. So don't, just wait for us to set up some appointments. And we said, well, aren't they just down on the third floor? And they said, yeah, but don't go there. So they left. We went down to the third floor. We got out of the elevator, and as it turns out, our badges wouldn't let us into the third floor anyway, but there was glass right there. All we had to do was stand there and watch. So we stood there and watched and pointed and talked a little bit, and then somebody came up behind us and said, are you guys trying to get in there? And we said, yeah. They said, okay, and they badged us in, and we went in. And then we stood and we were quiet, and then somebody turned and asked us, what are you guys doing here? And they said, we're working on the portfolio management system, but we don't want to get in your way. And they said, oh, great. Sit down here. I want to show you some stuff. And we sat down with that guy and with other people, and they showed us how this works. And we spent a couple hours there. They said, come back anytime. And they said, I'm glad you guys came down here because nobody ever comes and talks to us. So I've done this pattern a lot of times. Now, look, this guy is a fixed income portfolio manager. These four guys work together, and they're an active equity fund manager. And if you know anything about finance, what's interesting to us is they work very differently. These people work in a group or a team of four, and there's a lot of collaboration, and they've set up desks so they can. And what's important for you guys to know is you need to see that if I pan to the right, the room is super dark because I was there at 4 freaking a.m. in the morning in San Francisco because that's when they start their day. They've got to start looking at what comes out of these engines early, so that means I have to get up early to be there. And what's important, so it's early, and the other thing that's important is the guy on the right is a quant. He has run this engine that has generated their training strategy today, and it has blown up. And so we get to see what happens when this blows up, when the software that this organization writes and that we're responsible for blows up, and you need to be there to feel your software suck. That's what's important. This guy's name is Sharif, and I've known him for a lot of years. He's a senior product person at Atlassian, and they, as a habit, do this stuff. And by now you've read this quote, but they don't do customer interviews without having a developer in the room. It used to be a clever idea or a cool idea to talk to customers or for product people or researchers to talk to people, but now every team does, and now it is just not cool to have people there. It isn't somebody else's job to understand the problems you're solving. It's everybody's job. And this is work that if all you're focused on is velocity, will slow you down. But this is the work we do when we're actually validating we're doing the right thing. Now, let's talk about this next. So look, actually, let's update this here. If I just want to make sure I'm solving the right problem, then I can do, I can interview, I can observe. I could do things that are like surveys and things like that, and all those are a lot cheaper than building software, and all of those will save you a lot of time if you figure out what problem you're really solving. Those are quick things to do. Now, if I fast forward here a little bit, and if I say, look, do people really want it? Now, one way to see if people really want it is to build potentially shippable software and see if they ask them then if they want it. But look, I want to play a short video. This guy is the founder of TripAdvisor. He's describing the way that one of the ways that they check to see if people really want their product.
Is there, what are maybe some of the, if you have it, like some of the top piece of advice you might give, things you've learned, or?
Yeah, I've learned, for at least in a web-based, a consumer-facing web-based business, there's nothing like running a little test on the website itself to say what do customers, what do your visitors really want, and the notion of doing a quick test solves umpteen meetings worth of powerful debate and logical arguments. At TripAdvisor, we've for quite some time done these things called 404 tests. And HTTP 404 error, it's a link, it's broken, it gives you an error. And I'm a fan of, look, you want to test whether consumers want to sign up for a weekly newsletter on ski vacations? Hey, go put a link, before you build the darn thing, go put a link on your ski pages that says, sign up for our ski newsletter.
So it's a 404 test because you literally just redirect your 404s to this?
No, you put the link, you market it any which way you want on the site, the most compelling call to action, sign up, great ski newsletter. But before you actually spend the energy to design and build the product that you're actually going to deliver, in this case a newsletter, you put it on the site for an hour or a day and you see how many people click it. It goes nowhere. It says broken link to the user.
I see.
Your log file says how many people clicked on it.
Yeah.
And the marketing pushback I got when it was first introduced is, how can you do that to your customers? You're putting a broken link on your site deliberately. And I'm like, look, almost all the visitors' site, when they find a broken link, they're going to blame their internet connection, not me. And what's the worst that can happen? 1,000 people or 5,000 people can hit that broken link, and you're pissed off as a marketeer because we've disappointed 1,000 people. I'm high-fiving it all over the place because with a 10-minute test, I found some great usability, some great user feedback that says they want this feature.
And you maybe avoided disappointing far more people, right?
Obviously, in the other direction, if nobody actually clicked on it, then all the debate about whether it's a great idea or not is out the window. We couldn't market it on our own site. If we can't do that, I'm not interested as a feature.
So years ago, he coined the term 404 test, and years ago, they actually did generate a 404 error. People have gotten a lot smarter about that now. They refer to these as fake door tests or buttons to nowhere, or people like Ries would talk about landing page tests to market a product that doesn't yet exist. But one of the things that most websites do is put things on there and measure how people respond to those things. And now, instead of generating a 404 error, we might go to a page that says the functionality is not yet implemented, and then let people sometimes we give people the opportunity to sign up or be notified when this functionality comes alive, and then we can measure how many people see it and how many people click it, how many people get notified, and we get super worried about how many people we disappoint, so we automate that and we make sure we know that we're only going to show that message to 100 people or 1,000 people, or we decide what's okay because we don't want so many people to do it, and we don't want so many people to see that or get disappointed by that. And all of that stuff takes code. All of that stuff takes automation. And when we talk about Amazon releasing many times a day or every 11 point, how many seconds? How many times have they released while I've been talking? Somebody do the math on that. The important thing to note is this is a lot of what gets released at Amazon. These are very small things. They are not potentially shippable software. These are tests. These are the things that we do to see if we're building the right thing. And Amazon is awesome they're awesome at making money. But part of the reason they're awesome at making money is they're awesome at making sure they're making things people really want and use. And it takes some pretty good engineering to do that. Now, I mentioned this CarMax thing. These CarMax people, they do similar things. They've got to find out if people want their product. And the way you find out is by showing it to them and seeing if they respond. You don't have to build the whole thing. And this is one of the earlier prototypes that CarMax built. It's the page that comes up after you filled out a short application. It says you've been approved. And now as you shop, it's showing you cars with payment amounts. And they tested lots of variations of these things with one offer, and this one has 3 offers. But the idea is now I can now shop by payment amount. And when they tested these with these very simple prototypes, people were really responsive. They said, this is awesome, I would really like it. But something was shaky about it. People would say it's awesome, but they would kind of disengage, and they could tell, well, people were pretty interested, but not really interested. And it came down to, well, it was a static prototype. It was a prototype that only had that Volkswagen Jetta at the top, and how interested you were in the functionality had a lot to do with how interested you were in 2010 Volkswagen Jettas. That was a problem. Look, if we start trying to test, let me add a little bit more to this. If we want to know if people really want it, we can do well, you could do something, well, let's add in here, do something like a 404 test or a button to nowhere. We can do an interview with a prototype like CarMax did. But when we start talking about prototypes have some fidelity knobs that we can twist. When we start talking about prototype fidelity, we can look at the visual design. How real does it look? Does it look sexy? Does it look good? Does it actually look like a product? But we can also look at the data. Is that data accurate? Does that look real? If you show them sexy design with fake data in it, it's hard to know if that's real. And then finally, we can look at functional fidelity. Does it behave real? Now, the prototype that CarMax had shown looked real, and it had very realistic data, but it didn't do anything functionally. If you looked up a different car, it wasn't going to show you a different car. It was going to show you a 2010 Volkswagen Jetta. And it was hard to really engage in that. And what they decided was, look, we need something that's functional. Now, I've been drawing, and I'm going to add a few more things to this continuum here, but there's another axis on this continuum. If I do this as a 2-dimensional axis, and this axis, well, this vertical axis, I'm going to use that for confidence. You'd score higher on this axis if you were really confident this was the right thing to build. Or let's use this for risk. You'd score high on this axis if there was very little risk in sending something out. If it wouldn't hurt your business or your brand. Like Ries, if you're building a product that nobody likes, changing it isn't going to matter much because it's not like you're going to lose customers if you don't have any to begin with. The other thing we might look at is the amount of evidence we've got. If we've got a lot of evidence, we'd score high on this. Now, here's the way this works. Is if you work for a company and they expose their hypothesis, that you say, look, we believe if we implement this solution, people will do this and like this and will make money. You ask, well, how confident are you? Now, because of that bias problem, because people tend to fool themselves, these days the word hypothesis, one of the things we like is, well, I like the word bet. I will ask people, what would you bet me that you're right? I will ask, look, would you bet me lunch that you're right? Would you bet me lunch that people like this and use this and will make money? Or look, if we want to raise the bet, I can say, would you bet me a day's pay? Or would you bet me your car? Or would you bet me your house? Or would you bet me your job? Just whatever you do to raise the stakes. Now, if you are busy building something and working in a team, and you ask people, what would you bet me that you're right? And they say, yeah, I'd definitely bet you lunch. And they say, well, what about a day's pay? And if you start to get a little nervous about that, if that kind of puts you about here on the confidence scale. But if you are building scalable, shippable software, and you're somewhere around a day's pay, that puts you here on this, in this chart. Down here, this is the stupid zone. This is stupid and expensive. Now, sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes you've got an obvious problem. There's an obvious solution that's been done before, but in some companies, well, we've got new variations of analysis paralysis where everybody's nervous. So we always interview, we always build prototypes, we always insist on doing usability testing because that's the way we do things around here. But there's super low risk, there's super obvious solutions. If you're doing all that stuff, but you bet your house that you're right, that puts you here on this chart. This is also stupid, but it's just wasting time. Waste a little less money to do that, or at least people horsepower. Now, if you kind of get this, that there is, as you look at this chart, there's a safe zone right up the middle. If you're staying in the safe zone, you're increasing the amount of money you spend as your confidence increases. You don't start by building scalable, shippable software. Well, you get there after you're very confident. When CarMax said, look, we need a functional prototype, we need to scale to something functional, it needs to behave right, immediately the development team kind of went into a spiral and said, okay, well, we're going to need to build this back-end database, and we're going to need to build this functionality, and our best estimate is it's going to take us a couple months to do this for a couple people. And we looked at this and said, this is going to pull us way out here pretty far into stupid. So we don't want to do this. And we talked about we've got to find a cheaper way to test this. It just doesn't make sense for us to proceed. We poked around and we found that we could get really pretty good data out of a spreadsheet that the finance team maintained. But if we used this spreadsheet, well, we couldn't have concurrent access, or they were super nervous about having multiple users concurrently access a spreadsheet to get lots of data because they weren't using K, or where did Dave go? But they weren't, didn't look, it was an Excel spreadsheet. And they said, okay, we can create a prototype that's functional. We'll access the spreadsheet. We've got to really gate it. And if we want to make it, we don't want to rebuild all the front-end functionality, so we can use our A/B testing framework and we can wire it in, but we just have to kind of control it so only one user gets access to it. Basically, they found a way to stay safe. They found a way to build what I might call let's call it a functional prototype. Something that worked like it was real, but only for a very narrow amount of usage and things like that. What I want to show you is how they tested this. I realize let's show you how they tested this thing. Now, I happen to be there. I know this story well because I was there when we did this and we worked together to do this. They test by putting prototypes in front of users, but their users are all over the United States, so they connect to them and they share screens with Zoom. They use a tool called Ethnio. I showed you those people from Kodak that walk to where their product is being used and watch it being used and then talk to people. Well, if you've got a big consumer-facing website, you can't do that. But Ethnio is a tool that watches people using your website and will pop up a screener and more or less says, hey, can we talk to you for a minute? And in this case, the screener says, are you looking at buying a car? Will you be financing the car? And would you be willing to talk to us right now in exchange for an Amazon gift certificate? And they call this phishing, Ethnio phishing, and they call people back.
Hello, this is Matt.
Hey, Matt, this is Archie Miller calling from CarMax. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Hey, listen, Matt, you had recently filled out a survey on our website saying that you might be able to help us with some research. Is that still the case?
Yeah, sure. Could you just hold on like 30 seconds?
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
Now, he's at work. If they tried to make an appointment with him during the day, that would have been tough, but it shouldn't come as a surprise that people do personal business at work, and they're even willing to talk to you at work, especially in exchange for $100. Anyway, yeah, he'll do that. So they get him. They spend the first bit of time talking with him about who he is and if he's really going to buy a car. Mostly what's important is they make sure they're talking to a person that actually has the right problem. There's no way of automating this kind of testing. This is value testing. This is, do people want your product? There's no red-greenness to this at all. And if we need the feedback cycle for this, it has to be involved with, we need to get things in front of people.
So, Matt, if you don't mind, I'd like to do a quick role-playing exercise with you if I could.
Okay.
You had indicated in the screener that you filled out that you might consider financing for this car.
Yes.
So what would your finance...
Now, look, they got him connected. He's sharing a screen. I was there. They had him look for the car that he wanted. He's now looking specifically at the specific Mercedes ML that he wants and other cars that are similar. They talk with him about his finance situation. They want to make sure that he has that problem with financing where the payment is important to him. And then the way you test value is you ask people to imagine if. And Archie starts setting them up by saying we're going to do a role-playing exercise. Imagine if you had this solution and how would you feel about it? And they get to a point to show him the solution.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to take control just 1 second just to go through this role-playing exercise real quick, Matt. Let's say that you went on our site, and this is an example of what an online application might look like, the different types of things that we would ask. And let's say you went online, you filled this out, and then you have an apply button. And after you hit an apply button, you get an immediate response. So I wanted to show you what that response would be and then get your reaction to that, all right?
Okay.
So let's say you fill out the application, you hit apply, and this page comes up. Can you give me your reaction to this?
You're pushing me into a car. That's my initial reaction.
Okay.
You know what? It depends on again.
Now, stop it there. First, did it look like he liked that solution? No. Did it look like they were horribly surprised by his reaction? Yeah, so yes, a little, or no, or some of it, if you watch the Archie guy, he kind of nods. Well, we've been doing this all morning, and they're a little less surprised than you think because they've been in lots of variations of disappointment at this. And you wonder, why would they be disappointed now that they see this on their car? And the thing is, now they're looking really closely at that payment. Now they're paying close attention, and now this is the car this guy wants, and now he feels like, whoa, too soon. You're pushing me. I'm still in decision mode, and it looks like you're trying to make me buy it now. And then they get lots of other weird reactions like, oh, that payment looks super high, because no one likes the payment they get on the first try anyway. And they say, well, why is that payment so high? And that rate looks high because I've seen banks advertise lower rates than that. But they kind of conflate new car rates and used car rates. And they also don't pay attention to the fact that the older the car is and the higher the mileage, the worse the rate is. And what's going on here is people are getting really confused and frustrated, and they're thinking now they want to check with their bank, and they're upset because they can't afford as much car as they wanted, and at the end of the day they're getting really frustrated, and they want to, well, this is not helping. Now, CarMax's hypothesis isn't that if we provide people decisions in all vehicles, our customers will feel frustrated and doubt CarMax's brand and call their bank and slow down their car buying experience. That's the opposite of their hypothesis, and that's why these executives are so unhappy. They should be super happy because they've just avoided spending millions of dollars implementing this code. But the reason they're so unhappy is because from their perspective, they've just lost tens of or hundreds of millions of dollars in potential revenue. And remember, that's the point. This testing stuff there's longer to rant about this, but this is super annoying stuff. You spend a lot of your time being disappointed, and this goes back to most of our ideas suck or they don't work out. And well, this one was sponsored. It isn't the team's idea. It is the VP of Finance's idea, and you know how this goes. It's keep testing until you get the answer I want. And they are still testing lots of variations of this, but the one thing they're not doing is building potentially shippable software. Now, let me see if I can wind down here. Look, this is how we test for value. We've got these big can people use it problems. Well, the way to test for people using it is to actually watch people using it and see if they can learn how to use it. And well, this is one of the fastest, cheapest ways. These people are testing using a paper prototype. Has anybody ever done a test that looks like this before? So the guy on the right, he's a computer. And that's his memory in front of him. Person on the left, she's a user, and she's using this software, and they're using a piece of software that has a cool drag and drop UI. She's mapping logical things to physical things, and when she does the mapping, you'll see, see how that line appears on the screen. It's super cool. This is the way this works. Now, this may look like trivial software. The software definitely does not look real. The visual design isn't so good, but the data is accurate. These people work for HP. What they're redesigning or rethinking is a product called StorageWorks. It's used for managing large rooms of disk arrays in data centers, and there's no question they need the functionality. They already have the functionality, but the one thing they do know is that it absolutely sucks. It's super hard to use, and they need to try lots of different variations of it. In an afternoon, they do try several variations, and building a more sophisticated prototype of any variation would take days. So they can sit with a subject matter expert and sit with a team and go through lots of tests fast. This is how you learn fast. Now, the answer to can we actually build it is something that most Agile teams especially know, and that's this spike thing. We spike by exploring frameworks, by building reference architectures, by trying multiple solutions, and a spike should be time boxed, it should be short, but the goal is to figure things out. Well, can we do this? Now, the last thing, and this is the last part, and I'm slightly over time here. This will they keep using it thing, that starts to be the hard part. That starts to be the twitchy part. Look, I can see if people want it, they'll say they want it, I can make sure that they can use it, but for people to keep using it, we actually have to build it. Now, I'm going to show a little bit of a short video from a guy named Henrik Nieberg. He's created something called these Spotify development culture videos. Everybody heard of Spotify? Anybody watch these development culture videos? Look, this is where they explain how they do this thing. And what I want you to listen closely to is, well, first off, he refers to an MVP, not as any of these tests, but the first thing they ship, and it's probably similar to some of the definitions you guys use, but something they can ship that people use, but well, it isn't viable. It isn't going to make them money, but listen to what they use it for, and especially listen to who it's sent to. Maybe. Sorry.
Our product development approach is based on lean startup principles and is summarized by the mantra, think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. The biggest risk is always building the wrong thing. So before deciding to build a new product or major feature, we try to inform ourselves with research. Do people actually want this? Does it solve a real problem for them? Then we define a narrative, kind of like a press release or elevator pitch, showing off the benefits. For example, radio you can save or follow your favorite artist. We also define hypotheses. How will this feature impact user behavior and our core metrics? Will they share more music? Will they log in more often? And we build various prototypes and have people try them out to get a sense of what the feature might feel like and how people react. Once we feel confident this thing is worth building, we go ahead and build an MVP, minimum viable product. Just enough to fulfill the narrative, but far from feature complete. You might call it the minimum lovable product. The next stage of learning happens once we put something into production, so we want to get there as quickly as possible. We release the MVP to just a few % of all users, and use techniques like A/B testing to measure the impact and test our hypotheses. The squad monitors the data and continues tweaking and redeploying until they see the desired impact. Then they gradually roll out to the rest of the world, while taking the time needed to sort out practical stuff like operational issues and scaling. By the time the product or feature...
I want to stop it there. I want to point out an important stop point here. Somewhere between scalable, shippable software is what Spotify does. Somewhere around here is where we ship software to a small subset of our audience. At Spotify, that means good enough to work for thousands of users. But when you're working at the scale of millions of users, there is a big difference between what works for a small subset of users and what works for here. what works for everyone. Delivering to a small subset of users, they don't need to worry about scale, not quite so much. They definitely don't need to worry about localizing. They definitely don't need to worry about a lot of things. And they definitely don't want to hurt their brand. So they're not going to ship something bad to everybody. They ship something mediocre or something not right to a few people, because that's going to hurt. From talking with people at Spotify, once they iterate a few times here, once they've got something that's really great, once they've nailed it, once they've nailed it, then they've got to worry about how do we scale it up to millions of users. And there's a lot more engineering work that they know how to do, but they're not going to pay to do to begin with. The mantra that they and lots of other people use is to nail it before you scale it. They know that when they're working at this level that we are building to learn, not building to earn money. They know that they eventually do need to earn money. Eventually it does need to be at scale. But if they built everything to scale, it's just going to slow the learning down. Let's see if I can summarize all this stuff. That look, most organizations I work with confuse building to learn or building to earn. Most Agile people confuse those things. They rush to get things to ship, and if they do try and scale it to ship to everybody, they spend too much time, and when they do ship something bad, they damage their organization. Don't overspend to learn. Make sure you nail it before you scale it. I'm going to stop there. I'm over time. Thanks very much for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.